The encounter in the parking lot. It was an unusually warm Saturday afternoon, and Michael Jennings, a man in his 30s with a warm smile and calm demeanor, was on his usual grocery run. The store's parking lot was packed with people hurrying to get in and out, carts rattling as families bustled about. Michael pulled into the lot, scanning the rows for an open space. Finally, he spotted a prime spot near the entrance, a small victory on a busy day like this. Easing his car carefully between the lines, he shut off the engine and grabbed his list, ready to make his way into the store. Just as he was about to step out, a loud screech jolted him from his thoughts. Startled, Michael turned to see a white SUV veer aggressively into the spot beside him, stopping just inches away from his door. The woman inside was already glaring at him with a look that could pierce steel. "Hey!" she yelled, rolling down her window. Her voice was sharp, each word laced with indignation. "That was my spot." Michael blinked, momentarily stunned by her intensity. He hadn't noticed anyone waiting for the spot, and her sudden rage took him aback. Gathering himself, he responded calmly, "I'm sorry. I didn't see you." The woman's face twisted with anger as she slammed her door shut and stormed toward him. She was now inches from his face, eyes blazing with contempt. "Oh, of course you didn't," she sneered. "You people never notice anyone else, do you?" Michael's stomach sank, and he felt a familiar pang, the subtle sting of an insult wrapped in racial undertones. He forced himself to breathe, keeping his tone measured. "Ma'am, it's just a parking space. I didn't see you waiting." And the spot was open. But the woman wasn't listening. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening as she looked him up and down. "You people think you can just take whatever you want. You come into our neighborhoods, acting like you own the place." Her voice was rising, and several people nearby had started to glance over, drawn by the commotion. Michael clenched his fists, willing himself to stay calm. He'd seen this before, an argument over a minor inconvenience escalating into something ugly, the subtle shift from irritation to something deeper, more personal. He knew where this could go if he let it. "Look," he said, voice steady, "I don't want any trouble. I'm just here to buy some groceries." But his calm response only seemed to enrage her further. She took a step closer, practically vibrating with fury. "Don't talk to me like that. I've had enough of you people, thinking you can walk all over us. You're all the same, entitled and disrespectful." Michael's patience was wearing thin, but he reminded himself to stay collected. He tried to diffuse the situation one more time. "Ma'am, it's just a parking space. Please, let's not do this." The woman's face contorted with rage as if his calm demeanor was a personal affront. Without warning, she lunged forward, shoving him hard in the chest. Michael stumbled back, barely catching himself before he fell. "What is wrong with you?" he snapped, his voice finally betraying the frustration boiling beneath the surface. But the woman, who he mentally labeled as Karen, only sneered. "Oh, I'll do whatever I want. You think you can just walk away from me?" she hissed, her tone venomous. She took another step toward him, her face inches from his own. "I bet you don't even live around here. People like you are nothing but trouble." The words stung, but Michael was determined not to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. He glanced around and saw a few bystanders watching, some with concern, others with quiet curiosity. He was at a crossroads, and he knew it. If he didn't walk away now, this could spiral out of control. "Please just go about your day. I don't want any trouble." But the woman was unrelenting. Her sneer widened, and she jabbed a finger into his chest. "Trouble? You think you're above consequences? People like you ruin everything. Just walk away." "No, I'm not finished yet." Michael's fists clenched, the tension in his chest building. He knew what was happening, knew she was trying to provoke him into a reaction, but he wouldn't let her win that easily. He took a deep breath, his voice steady but firm. "Ma'am, this needs to stop. Walk away before you do something you'll regret." But her anger only escalated, and with a final sneer, she swung her hand up and slapped him across the face. The sting of the slap reverberated through Michael's cheek, the humiliation of it searing into him. For a second, he stood there, stunned. The slap wasn't just an insult. It was a challenge, an assertion that she thought she could treat him however she pleased without consequence. Then, almost as if on reflex, he raised his hand and delivered a slap back, not with the same force but enough to send a clear message. The contact was brief, controlled, but effective. The woman staggered back, her face registering shock. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by her sharp intake of breath. You hit me," she shrieked, her voice rising to a near hysterical pitch. "Do you know who I am? You're going to pay for this." Her words were loud, shrill, and carried across the parking lot as more onlookers turned their heads, curious and appalled by the scene unfolding before them. Michael's pulse raced, a mix of anger and regret roiling within him. He hadn't wanted any of this, hadn't wanted to engage in her hate-fueled confrontation. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her disrespect him without standing up for himself. The woman's face twisted in fury, and she pointed a trembling finger at him. "You're done. You hear me. You're finished." But Michael met her gaze calmly, refusing to let her see any fear. "Maybe it's time for you to walk away, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice steady. But in her eyes, he could see she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The public showdown. Michael's cheek still stung from the slap, the shock of it reverberating through him. Around them, the scene had drawn a small crowd. Shoppers pausing mid-errand, their eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and unease. Phones began to appear, some capturing the scene from a distance, others lifted subtly. The glow of screens marking the moment as something people wanted to witness but not interrupt. "Did you see that?" The woman shrieked, turning to the onlookers with a dramatic flourish. Her voice carried a grating, piercing quality that could slice through steel. "This man, this thug, just attacked me." Michael's heart hammered as he took a step back, his mind racing with thoughts of what she might say next. He knew how quickly a story could twist, how a single lie uttered with enough conviction could turn perception into reality. And here he was, facing a woman who seemed willing to say anything to ruin him. "I told him that was my parking spot, and he just hit me." Her words echoed with a false innocence, her tone shifting between fury and victimhood, a crafted performance that was as transparent as it was dangerous. Her eyes darted to the phones around her, and she continued, her voice wavering theatrically. "I don't feel safe." Michael felt a familiar weight settle in his chest, that gut-wrenching tension that came from being watched, judged, and categorized based on a stranger's rage-fueled narrative. It was a moment he knew he would never forget. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Michael began, his voice calm but laced with the frustration that churned within him. "You slapped me first. I was just defending myself." But his words only seemed to fuel her fury. She let out a dramatic gasp, clutching her chest, as if his response had physically wounded her. "Are you saying I would hit you?" "Me? I was just standing here, minding my own business, and you just lashed out at me." A few onlookers exchanged glances, their faces skeptical but intrigued, caught between wanting to know what had happened and feeling too uncomfortable to get involved. A young man with a skateboard muttered something to his friend, who looked between Michael and the woman with an uncertain frown. Another woman, an older shopper with a cart full of groceries, looked Michael up and down with a mixture of disapproval and pity, as if she had already made up her mind about him. The anger simmering beneath Michael's composed exterior threatened to break free. He had seen this dynamic play out too many times before. The public accusations, the subtle switch in tone, the insinuations designed to make him look like the aggressor. But he knew he had to keep his cool. He couldn't afford to let her drag him down to her level, not when there were eyes and phones watching every move. "I don't want any trouble," he said, taking a step back, his voice carrying across the hushed lot. I came here to shop, just like everyone else. Let's both go our separate ways." But the woman wasn't done. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them, her voice turning venomous. "Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? Just walk away after hitting me, thinking you can do whatever you please." Her voice rose with every word, feeding off the attention of the crowd, her gestures growing more dramatic as she painted him as a threat. It was an old tactic, one that played on stereotypes and assumptions, turning a simple parking dispute into a spectacle. "Ma'am," Michael said, his tone now firm, "you need to stop this. People are watching, and this doesn't have to go any further." She laughed, a cold, mocking sound that sent a chill through him. "Oh, I know they're watching. I want them to see exactly what people like you are capable of." She sneered, her eyes glinting with a cruel satisfaction as she continued. "Go on. Show everyone what you're really like." It took every ounce of self-control for Michael not to react, not to let her see the frustration and anger that churned inside him. He knew she was baiting him, trying to provoke a reaction that would justify her behavior, that would validate the twisted narrative she was spinning. Just then, a voice called out from the edge of the crowd. "Hey, lady, why don't you calm down?" It was the young man with the skateboard, his tone wary but defiant. He took a step forward, his gaze shifting from her to Michael. "I saw you shoving him first. What's your problem?" The woman turned, her face flushing with anger as she zeroed in on the man. "You didn't see anything. You don't know what he did to me. He attacked me for no reason." "Doesn't look that way to me," the young man shot back, crossing his arms. "You're the one yelling, and he's just standing there." For a brief moment, Michael felt a flicker of relief, a small glimmer of hope that someone could see through her act. But the woman's fury only deepened, her voice sharpening into an edge of accusation. "Oh, of course, you're taking his side. You're all just the same." The young man scowled but didn't respond, and the woman's attention snapped back to Michael. "You think this is funny?" She spat, her face twisting in disgust. "You think you can just stroll in here and act however you want?" Michael's hands trembled at his sides, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a vice. He could feel the silent judgment of the onlookers, the tension that buzzed in the air as they watched, waiting for something to happen. But he wouldn't give her what she wanted. He wouldn't let her drag him down. "Look," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I didn't start this. You did. I don't want any trouble, and I'd appreciate it if you'd just walk away." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he thought she might listen. That maybe, just maybe, she would let it go. But then, her gaze flicked to his car, and her lips curved into a malicious smile. "Oh, I'll walk away all right, but you'll regret this, believe me." She turned, her steps brisk and angry as she stormed back toward her car. Michael watched her go, his chest tight with a mixture of relief and residual anger. He could feel the eyes of the crowd still on him, their expressions a blend of confusion and intrigue, as if they weren't quite sure what to make of the scene they had just witnessed. Slowly, the onlookers began to disperse, returning to their shopping carts and conversations, their whispers fading into the background. Michael let out a long, shaky breath, feeling the tension ease ever so slightly as the crowd thinned. But even as he tried to shake off the encounter, he couldn't escape the feeling that it wasn't over, that she wouldn't let it end so easily. He knew the look in her eyes, the way her expression had shifted from anger to something darker, more vindictive. This wasn't just about a parking spot. It was about something else entirely, something deeper and uglier. As he headed into the store, he tried to push the incident out of his mind, focusing on the simple task of buying groceries. But the words she had thrown at him lingered, like a stain that wouldn't wash away. "You people think you can do whatever you want." He shook his head, trying to clear the anger from his thoughts. He had dealt with people like her before, people who saw him as a threat, as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong. It was a part of his life he had learned to manage, to navigate with a careful balance of patience and restraint. But today, something felt different. Her words had dug deeper, her actions more aggressive, her malice sharper than he had felt in a long time. It was as if she had taken every stereotype, every prejudice he had ever faced, and hurled it at him with the force of a sledgehammer. He pushed his cart down the aisles, grabbing the items on his list with mechanical precision, trying to focus on the mundane routine of shopping. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done with him. As he reached the checkout line, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he glanced at the screen, only to find a string of notifications from a social media app he hadn't even opened. Curious, he tapped on one, and his heart sank as he realized what it was. Someone had posted a video of the confrontation in the parking lot. The clip was short, only a few seconds, but it captured the slap, the accusation, her words laced with venom and entitlement. He could see his own face in the frame, tense and conflicted, his restraint palpable, as he tried to de-escalate the situation. But the video cut off just as she turned back to her car, leaving out the part where she had slapped him first, where she had launched into a tirade of insults. He stared at the video, feeling a sick knot form in his stomach as the comments began to roll in. Some were supportive, seeing through the woman's act, but others echoed her words, the same tired stereotypes and assumptions, the same judgments cast from a single clipped moment taken out of context. Typical, thinks he can do whatever he wants. This is what happens when they come into our neighborhoods. Michael clenched his jaw, feeling the anger coil within him like a tightly wound spring. He wanted to respond, to defend himself, to tell the full story. But he knew it would only feed the fire, only add fuel to the narrative she had spun with such practiced ease. He finished checking out, his mind still reeling from the encounter and the fallout that had followed. As he stepped out into the parking lot, the bright afternoon sun seemed harsher, casting long shadows over the rows of cars. And there, across the lot, he saw her. She was leaning against her SUV, a smug smile on her face as she watched him approach. Her eyes gleamed with a dark satisfaction, as if she had won, as if she held some power over him. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him. He knew he had a choice to make, to let it go, to walk away, or to stand his ground and face whatever came next. But one thing was certain, she wasn't finished, and neither was he. Damage done. As Michael walked toward his car, the knot of tension in his stomach tightened. The encounter in the parking lot played on repeat in his mind, each moment laced with a familiar sense of disbelief. He glanced at Karen, who was still leaning against her SUV, her smug expression etched into his memory. It was a face he knew he would never forget, a symbol of entitlement that he had faced far too often. He approached his car, and as he got closer, a sense of foreboding washed over him. The bright afternoon sun glinted off the glossy surface of the vehicle, but instead of shining like it usually did, it felt like a spotlight illuminating the impending disaster. When he reached his car, his heart sank. The pristine paint job was marred by deep scratches that snaked along the side, evidence of a furious assault. It was as if someone had taken a key and dragged it across the surface, gouging the metal beneath and exposing the raw underbelly of the vehicle. Michael ran his fingers along the scratches, feeling the cold metal beneath the damage. His breath quickened as anger surged through him. This wasn't just some random act of vandalism. This was deliberate, personal. Karen had done this. He was certain of it. She had watched him walk away, and in that moment of triumph, she had chosen to exact her revenge, to leave her mark. What the hell? He muttered under his breath, feeling the heat rise in his chest. The pain of the slap still lingered, but this felt worse. This was an attack on his property, a violation that would cost him time and money. "Looks like you've got a little problem there," came a mocking voice from behind him. Michael turned to see Karen sauntering over, her expression gleeful, as if she were relishing in his misfortune. "I thought you said you didn't want any trouble." He clenched his fists at his sides, the anger roiling inside him like a storm. "You did this, didn't you?" he said, his voice low but steady. "You scratched my car." Karen shrugged, the corners of her mouth twisting into a smirk. "Maybe you shouldn't have hit me then. Actions have consequences, you know. Perhaps next time you'll think twice before attacking a woman." Michael took a deep breath, trying to rein in the surge of emotions that threatened to spill over. It was infuriating how she twisted the narrative to suit her own agenda, turning him into the aggressor while she played the innocent victim. "You're out of your mind," he replied, struggling to maintain his composure. "This is beyond ridiculous." "Oh, but you're the one who made it ridiculous," she said, leaning in closer, her voice dripping with disdain. "You could have just walked away, but you couldn't help yourself, could you? Now look at you. It's all on display for everyone to see." Michael's heart raced as he felt the weight of the onlookers' gazes upon him once more. He could see a few people lingering nearby, whispering to each other, their phones still in hand, capturing the spectacle unfolding before them. It was as if he were a character in a twisted reality show, one that had spiraled out of his control. "Why don't you just admit it?" Karen continued, her voice rising. "You can't stand that I called you out. You're angry because I showed you what you really are, just a thug pretending to be civilized." He shook his head, disbelief mixing with outrage. "You really think that's how this works? You start a fight over a parking spot, physically assault me, and then act like you're the one who's been wronged. You're the one who should be ashamed." But Karen only laughed, a cold, derisive sound that sent a chill down his spine. "Ashamed? Hardly. I'm just getting started, sweetie. You have no idea who you're messing with." Before he could respond, she whipped out her phone, the screen lighting up as she began typing furiously. "Oh yes, this will make a great post. Thug attacks innocent woman in grocery store parking lot," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe I'll include the part where you hit me." "Go ahead," Michael said, feeling a rush of defiance. "But don't think for a second that anyone will believe your twisted version of events." Karen met his gaze, her expression unwavering, and he felt a momentary flicker of doubt. What if she did manage to sway public opinion? What if her narrative took root in the minds of those who had witnessed the encounter? The thought gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside, refusing to let her intimidation tactics work. As he stood there, feeling the weight of her malice, the adrenaline began to subside, replaced by a steely determination. He couldn't let her get away with this. Not now, not ever. He took a step back and reached for his phone, his hand steady despite the turmoil within. "I'm calling the police," he announced, his voice firm. "You can't just vandalize my car and walk away without consequences." Karen's laughter echoed across the parking lot, ringing with a sharpness that cut through the tension. "Oh, please, you really think they'll take your side over mine? A black man attacking a white woman. They'll see you as the threat." The words stung, hitting too close to home, but Michael forced himself to stand tall. "Let's find out, shall we?" As he dialed the police, he kept his eyes on her, watching as her smirk faded into a scowl. He felt a sense of empowerment, reclaiming control over a situation that had spiraled out of his hands. The dispatcher answered, and he quickly relayed the details of the incident, the vandalism, and the confrontation that had unfolded in the parking lot. "I need an officer to come to the grocery store parking lot on Maple Street," he said, his voice steady. "A woman has damaged my car, and I believe she's been aggressive towards me." Karen's expression shifted from amusement to indignation as she heard him speaking. "You're really going to do this? You think they're going to believe you? You're just making a fool of yourself," she yelled, her voice cracking with rage. "I'm not the one who vandalized a car," he replied coolly, hanging up the call. "But I will be the one to stand up for myself." In the distance, he could see the lights of a police car flashing, the blue and red cutting through the haze of the afternoon sun. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly followed by a sense of trepidation. Would the officers listen to him? Would they see the truth in the situation, or would they be swayed by her manipulative narrative? Karen was still ranting, her voice rising above the noise of the parking lot. This is harassment. You're just doing this because I stood up to you. You're a coward." Michael ignored her, focusing on the police car as it pulled into the lot. The officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they surveyed the scene. Michael could feel the eyes of the onlookers on him again, a mix of judgment and curiosity as they watched the drama unfold. "Sir, what seems to be the problem?" one of the officers asked, approaching Michael first. "This woman vandalized my car," he said, pointing toward Karen, who was now pacing like a caged animal. "She slapped me first in a confrontation over a parking space, and now she's taken it a step further." The officer glanced at Karen, who was now trying to weave her own narrative. "He attacked me first," she shouted, her hands waving wildly in the air. "I was just defending myself." Michael could feel the tension rising again as the officer turned his attention to Karen. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down," he said firmly. "Let's hear what happened from both of you." Michael took a deep breath, grateful for the officer's calm demeanor. He recounted the events, detailing the initial confrontation, her physical aggression, and the damage to his vehicle. He made sure to stay clear and concise, focusing on the facts without letting his emotions cloud the truth. "And you say she scratched your car while you were inside the store?" the officer asked, taking notes as Michael nodded. "Yes," he replied, gesturing toward the scratches. "They weren't there when I parked, and I saw her laughing as I walked back. She was clearly proud of what she did." The officer nodded and turned to Karen, his expression shifting to one of skepticism. "And what's your side of the story, ma'am?" Karen hesitated, her confident demeanor faltering as she realized the officers were listening intently. "He's lying. I was just trying to get away from him after he hit me," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "I wasn't even near his car when I left." Michael felt a spark of indignation flare up inside him, but he held his ground, refusing to let her lies shake his resolve. The officer glanced back at the car, assessing the damage before speaking again. "We'll need to take a look at the damage and gather some information. Can you show me where you parked?" As they walked over to the car, Michael felt a mix of anxiety and relief. Finally, someone was taking him seriously. As the officer inspected the scratches, he gestured for his partner to come over. "Looks like we have enough to start an investigation," the officer said, turning back to Karen. "I suggest you come with us so we can sort this out." Karen's eyes widened, the bravado she had displayed slipping away. "You can't be serious. This is outrageous," she exclaimed, her voice laced with panic. "I'm the one who's been attacked here." "Ma'am, we're going to take your statement," the officer said, his tone steady but firm. "You're not under arrest, but we need to clarify what happened." Michael felt a surge of hope as he watched the officers escort her away. This wasn't just about his car. It was about standing up for himself, about making sure she faced the consequences of her actions. As they stood there, Michael could feel the eyes of the crowd still on him, a mix of curiosity and respect beginning to settle among them. He had stood his ground, refused to let her bully him, and it felt like a small victory in a world that often seemed stacked against him. When the officers returned, they took down his statement and assured him that they would follow up on the incident. As they handed him a card with their contact information, Michael felt a sense of closure beginning to settle over him. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir," one of the officers said, his expression kind. "We'll keep you informed about any developments in this case." "Thank you," Michael replied, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't over yet, but it felt like he was finally taking a stand against the injustice that had unfolded in front of him. As he watched the police car pull away, Karen inside with her own narrative unraveling, he couldn't shake the feeling of triumph. He had stood up for himself, faced the confrontation head-on, and refused to back down. But even as he felt that spark of victory, he knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The police intervention. As the police car disappeared from view, Michael stood in the parking lot, still processing the whirlwind of events. The adrenaline that had fueled him through the confrontation began to ebb away, replaced by a lingering tension that settled deep in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't finished with him yet. A few curious onlookers lingered, their expressions a mix of intrigue and uncertainty, but Michael barely registered them. His mind raced as he replayed the events in his head, each moment intertwining with the next, leaving a complex tapestry of emotions: anger, fear, and a flicker of hope. Just then, his phone buzzed again, pulling him back to reality. He glanced down to see a text from a friend, asking if he was okay. Michael took a moment to respond, typing a quick message about the altercation, but his thoughts were still on Karen, her vindictiveness, and the lengths she might go to defend her twisted narrative. Suddenly, he noticed the same officers returning, this time accompanied by a third officer, a woman with a determined look in her eyes. She approached him first, her notepad ready. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Officer Lee. I'd like to get your statement regarding the incident." "Of course," Michael replied, grateful for the professionalism she exuded. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the moment ahead. He recounted the story again, detailing everything from the moment he parked to the physical confrontation with Karen. As he spoke, he could see the officers taking notes, their expressions focused and serious. "So, just to clarify," Officer Lee said as she jotted down details, "you mentioned that she slapped you first, and then you slapped her back in defense." "Yes," Michael confirmed, feeling a surge of frustration as he remembered the sting of the slap. "I was trying to walk away. I didn't want any trouble, but she kept escalating the situation." Officer Lee nodded, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "And after that, you discovered the damage to your car?" "Yes," he replied, gesturing toward the scratches that marred the side of his vehicle. "I didn't see the damage until after I called you. It was clear she did it intentionally." Officer Lee glanced at Officer Reynolds, who had been silently observing, before turning her attention back to Michael. "And you believe she has a history of this kind of behavior?" Michael hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to frame his answer. He had seen people like Karen before, the entitlement and aggression simmering just beneath the surface. "I don't know if she has a history," he said finally, "but I've faced similar situations before. People who think they can treat others however they want without consequences." "I understand," Officer Lee said, her tone empathetic. "We'll look into her background. It's essential that we get all the facts straight." Just then, Karen emerged from the police car, her expression dark and filled with fury. She was no longer the confident woman who had confronted him in the parking lot. She was visibly shaken, the weight of the situation beginning to sink in. As she approached, Michael could see her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for any semblance of support. "You're going to regret this," she spat, her voice low but fierce. "You think you can just call the cops on me. You don't know who you're dealing with." Michael met her gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he shot back, his voice steady. "Someone who thinks they can act without consequence." Karen's eyes widened with disbelief, her mouth opening in a snarl. "You're just a nobody. They'll believe me over you. You think you can just slap me and walk away." "Actually, I'm the one who tried to walk away," he countered. "You're the one who escalated this whole thing." Officer Lee stepped forward, her authoritative presence cutting through the tension. "Ma'am, I need you to remain calm. We're trying to get to the bottom of this situation. If you have a statement to make, now is the time." Karen scoffed, crossing her arms defiantly. "You think you can intimidate me? This is nothing more than a racial attack. He assaulted me, and you're going to take his side just because he's a black man." The accusation hung in the air, thick with implications. Michael felt his heart race as he realized the depth of her manipulative tactics. She was trying to leverage his race against him, to spin the narrative in a way that would play into the biases and fears that existed within society. "Ma'am, this isn't about race," Officer Reynolds interjected firmly, his voice calm but unyielding. "This is about the actions that took place today. We need to focus on the facts." "Facts?" Karen's voice dripped with sarcasm as she pointed at Michael. He hit me first. Everyone here saw it. You can't tell me you believe him over me. Michael clenched his fists, feeling the pressure building as he fought to keep his emotions in check. He had encountered this kind of dismissal before, the way people often overlook the truth in favor of a more comfortable narrative. Look, it doesn't matter what color our skin is, Officer Lee said, her gaze unwavering as she regarded Karen. What matters is the evidence and the accounts we gather. We're here to investigate, and we need you to cooperate. Karen hesitated, her bravado faltering under the officer's scrutiny. I don't have to listen to you, she snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, you do, Officer Reynolds replied, his tone firm but not aggressive. If you don't cooperate, we can't help you. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog, and Michael felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He had expected Karen to fight back, but her unwillingness to bend under pressure began to shift the tide in his favor. Let's talk about the evidence, Officer Lee suggested, directing the conversation back to the facts. You say he assaulted you. What proof do you have? Proof. Karen's face twisted in frustration. He's a man. He hit me. You can't deny that. Actually, we can, Officer Reynolds said, his expression calm. If you would like to present any evidence, we are here to listen. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for something, anything, that would validate her claims. But deep down, she knew she had nothing. The crowd had witnessed her aggression, her manipulation, and now the officers were beginning to see through her facade. Michael felt a flicker of hope, his confidence bolstered by the officers' determination to find the truth. You can check the surveillance cameras in the store, he suggested, his voice steady. They'll show what happened. You'll see that she was the one who started it. Good idea, Officer Lee nodded, making a note in her pad. We'll retrieve the footage as part of our investigation. It'll give us a clearer picture of what transpired. Karen's expression darkened, the smug confidence slipping from her grasp. You think those cameras will help you? She sneered. You're all just going to look foolish when I'm vindicated. But Michael remained unfazed. You've already made a fool of yourself, Karen. This is about accountability. You can't just go around hurting people and think you'll get away with it. The officers exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. They were familiar with this type of scenario, the manipulative tactics of individuals trying to play the system to their advantage. But today, the truth was on Michael's side. As the officers prepared to take further statements from the remaining witnesses, Michael felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't just about his car. It was about reclaiming his dignity, about standing firm against someone who believed she could bully him into submission. When the officers called the witnesses one by one, Michael watched as people began to share their accounts. Some offered support, recounting how Karen had instigated the conflict and escalated it with her aggressive behavior. Others hesitated, unsure of how to navigate the complexities of the situation. But the tide had turned. Finally, the officers approached Michael again, their expressions serious. We've spoken to a few witnesses, and their accounts align with yours, Officer Reynolds said, his voice reassuring. We'll need to review the surveillance footage, but it looks like you have a strong case. A wave of relief washed over him. Thank you, he said, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It was the validation he had desperately needed, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. As the officers began to wrap up their investigation, Karen stood off to the side, her anger simmering beneath the surface. She was no longer the confident woman who had confronted him earlier. Her expression was one of frustration and disbelief. You'll regret this, she shouted, her voice sharp as the officers turned their backs. You'll see. I know people. You're going to pay for this, Michael. Michael met her gaze calmly, the fire of her threats unable to pierce his newfound resolve. You've already shown who you are, Karen. I won't let you intimidate me any longer. With that, the officers led her away, her voice fading into the distance as they moved toward the police car. Michael stood in the parking lot, watching the scene unfold, feeling a sense of empowerment swell within him. The battle wasn't over yet, but he had taken a significant step forward. He was reclaiming his narrative, standing up for himself, and refusing to let someone like Karen dictate his reality. As he prepared to leave the parking lot, Michael glanced at his car. The scratches still visible, now symbols of resilience rather than shame. He would get it repaired. He would press charges. But more importantly, he had learned something about himself today. That standing up against injustice was worth every ounce of energy it required. With his head held high, he walked away from the parking lot, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The courtroom confrontation. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension as Michael Jennings sat on one side of the room, his heart racing in rhythm with the ticking clock on the wall. The faint hum of whispered conversations surrounded him, filling the space with an anxious energy. It had been weeks since the confrontation in the grocery store parking lot, but the aftermath had been a whirlwind of emotions, and now finally it had come to this, his day in court. He glanced at the wooden bench opposite him, where Karen Thompson sat with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who seemed more interested in making a case than in seeking the truth. Karen's expression was a mix of defiance and indignation, a familiar look that Michael had seen countless times before. She wore a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, her appearance carefully curated to convey an air of professionalism. But beneath the surface, Michael could see the anger simmering, the desperate need to paint herself as the victim. The courtroom doors swung open, and the judge entered, a stern figure clad in black robes, exuding authority. Silence fell over the room as everyone rose to their feet. Michael felt a wave of nervous energy wash over him, a mixture of anticipation and dread. This was it, the moment that would determine not only the outcome of his case, but also the validation he had sought since that fateful day. "Please be seated," the judge commanded, taking her place at the bench. Her gaze swept across the room, her expression unreadable. "We're here today to address the charges brought against Miss Thompson regarding the incident involving Mr. Jennings. I expect decorum and respect from all parties present." Michael settled into his chair, reminding himself to breathe. He had prepared for this day, rehearsing his statements and gathering his thoughts. But now that he was here, doubt crept in. Would the judge see the truth? Would justice prevail? The prosecutor stood and addressed the court, presenting the case against Karen with clarity and conviction. "Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that Ms. Thompson assaulted Mr. Jennings in a public space, initiating a confrontation over a parking dispute. Witness statements corroborate Mr. Jennings' account, and surveillance footage from the grocery store supports his claim that Ms. Thompson was the aggressor." Michael felt a surge of hope as the prosecutor laid out the facts, recounting the events that had unfolded in the parking lot. He watched as the judge leaned forward. Her interest peaked, and the weight of her authority began to fill the room. "Miss Thompson," the judge said, turning her gaze toward Karen, "how do you plead to these charges?" Karen's lawyer rose to speak, his tone defensive. "Your Honor, we contest these charges. My client has maintained that she was the victim in this situation, acting in self-defense against an unprovoked attack." Michael's heart sank momentarily. He had anticipated this tactic, Karen's attempt to manipulate the narrative and flip the story around. But he couldn't let that discourage him. He had faced the truth in the courtroom before. This time would be no different. The judge nodded, her expression contemplative as she motioned for the prosecutor to continue. "Please call your witnesses." The first witness, a young woman who had been shopping that day, took the stand. She described the confrontation in detail, her voice steady as she recounted how Karen had escalated the situation, shoving Michael and slapping him first. Her testimony mirrored what Michael had experienced, providing a clear contrast to Karen's claims. The second witness, an older man who had been loading groceries into his car nearby, followed. His account was just as compelling, describing how Michael had tried to defuse the situation, only to be met with aggression. The weight of their words began to build a foundation beneath Michael's case, one that felt solid and undeniable. As each witness stepped down, Michael felt a sense of empowerment growing within him. This wasn't just a battle over a parking spot or a slap in the face. It was about holding someone accountable for their actions, for the lies they perpetuated to protect their fragile ego. Finally, it was Michael's turn to take the stand. He rose, heart pounding, and walked to the witness box. As he took his seat, he could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on him. Some filled with sympathy, others skeptical. He swallowed hard, reminding himself to stay composed, to tell his truth without hesitation. "Mr. Jennings," the prosecutor began, "can you describe what happened on the day of the incident?" Michael took a deep breath, his mind racing back to that moment in the parking lot. "I arrived at the grocery store and found an open parking space. As I parked and opened my door, a woman in a white SUV yelled at me, claiming that I had taken her spot. I tried to explain that I hadn't seen her, but she became increasingly aggressive, accusing me of being entitled and disrespectful." He continued, recounting the escalation, the shove, the slap, and how he had ultimately slapped her back in a moment of reflex, not aggression. "I was simply trying to walk away from the confrontation, but she wouldn't let me. She physically assaulted me first. I just wanted to buy my groceries and go home." As he spoke, he watched the judge's expression. She listened intently, taking notes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Michael felt a flicker of confidence, bolstered by the realization that he was telling the truth, his truth. "Mr. Jennings," the prosecutor asked, "how did you feel in that moment? How did it affect you?" The question struck a chord deep within him. It was humiliating, he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've faced situations like this before, and it's exhausting. It's not just about a parking spot. It's about being treated like I don't belong, like I'm less than human." That slap was a reminder of the prejudices I encounter every day. Michael's words hung in the air, resonating not just with the judge but with everyone present. He felt the weight of the truth settle over him like a warm blanket, providing a sense of comfort amidst the chaos. This was his moment, one he had fought hard to reach. As he finished his testimony, he stepped down from the stand, his heart racing but lighter than it had felt in weeks. He had done it. He had shared his story and stood tall in the face of adversity. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Karen's lawyer rose to cross-examine him. Michael steeled himself for the challenge, knowing that this was the moment when Karen would try to discredit him, to undermine his testimony. "Mr. Jennings," the lawyer began, his tone slick and condescending, "isn't it true that you have a history of confrontations like this, that you often react with aggression when challenged?" Michael felt a rush of indignation. "No, that's not true. I try to avoid confrontations. I was simply defending myself that day." "Defending yourself, or escalating a minor disagreement into something much larger?" the lawyer pressed. "You slapped Ms. Thompson first, didn't you? Isn't it possible that you are the one who provoked this entire situation?" "Provoked?" Michael echoed, his voice rising with a mix of disbelief and frustration. "I didn't provoke anything. I tried to walk away, but she wouldn't let me. She was the one who initiated the violence." The lawyer leaned closer, his gaze intense. "You say you tried to walk away, but what about the slap? Don't you think that reaction says more about you than about her?" "I reacted in self-defense," Michael shot back, his heart pounding. "Her aggression forced my hand. I was pushed to the limit." The lawyer sneered, shifting the narrative back to his favor. "And yet you're here, trying to paint yourself as the victim. You think that because you're a black man, your story will resonate more with the court." The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. Michael's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the undertones in the lawyer's words, subtle but insidious attempts to manipulate the courtroom against him. "No," he replied, his voice unwavering. "I'm here because I refuse to let her actions go unchallenged. This isn't about race. It's about accountability. I deserve to be treated with respect, just like anyone else." The judge raised her hand, signaling for silence as she leaned forward, her expression stern. I will not tolerate attempts to undermine any witness's testimony based on race. This court is about justice, and we will focus on the facts presented. The lawyer faltered, clearly taken aback by the judge's intervention. Of course, Your Honor, he said, regaining his composure. As Michael returned to his seat, he felt a surge of gratitude toward the judge. She had recognized the tactic for what it was and had drawn a clear line in the sand. He had come to realize that this battle was not just about him. It was about everyone who had ever faced discrimination, prejudice, and injustice. It was about standing up against the narrative that sought to diminish their worth. The rest of the proceedings passed in a blur as Karen took the stand, her demeanor shifting between defiance and feigned innocence. She attempted to paint herself as a victim, claiming that Michael had threatened her, but the cracks in her story began to show as the prosecutor meticulously dismantled her claims. Ma'am, the prosecutor began, is it not true that you were the one who confronted Mr. Jennings over a parking spot? That you physically assaulted him first? Karen's bravado faltered under the weight of the evidence presented, and her voice trembled as she tried to hold onto her narrative. He provoked me. I was just defending myself. But the prosecutor pressed on, revealing the witness testimonies that contradicted her claims. The more they questioned her, the more desperate her answers became, the fabric of her deceit unraveling before the court's eyes. Finally, as the proceedings came to a close, the judge called for a recess, allowing everyone to regroup before the final deliberation. Michael stepped outside the courtroom, his heart racing with anticipation and uncertainty. He leaned against the cool wall, taking a moment to breathe deeply. Michael, a familiar voice called out, breaking through his thoughts. He turned to see his friend, Daniel, walking toward him, concern etched across his face. How are you holding up? Honestly, I'm not sure, Michael admitted, running a hand through his hair. This has been a lot, and I'm just waiting for the judge's decision. Daniel placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You did great up there. Just remember that the truth is on your side. No one can take that away from you. Michael nodded, grateful for the support. I just hope the judge sees through her manipulation. They chatted quietly, exchanging words of encouragement as they waited for the court to resume. Finally, the doors opened again, and everyone filed back in, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The judge took her seat, her expression serious as she surveyed the room. We've heard enough evidence and testimony to make an informed decision, she stated, her voice steady. I will now render my verdict. Michael held his breath, the weight of the moment crashing down around him. This was it, his fate, his future, hanging in the balance. Miss Thompson, the judge began, you have been found guilty of assault and property damage against Mr. Jennings. The evidence presented, along with the testimonies, clearly indicate that you were the aggressor in this situation. Reflections on justice and strength. The sun dipped low in the sky as Michael Jennings stepped out of the courthouse, the warm golden light casting long shadows on the pavement. He took a deep breath, the cool breeze brushing against his skin as he felt a mix of relief and disbelief wash over him. He had faced Karen in court, stood up against her lies, and, against all odds, had come out on the winning side. Walking down the steps, he couldn't help but think of how far he had come since that fateful day in the grocery store parking lot. What had started as a minor disagreement over a parking space had transformed into a significant confrontation, one that forced him to confront not only the prejudices of others, but also the challenges within himself. Hey, you still with us? Daniel's voice cut through his reverie, pulling Michael back to the present. His friend had been walking beside him, a supportive presence throughout the entire ordeal. Yeah, I'm here, Michael replied, forcing a smile as he glanced at Daniel, just lost in thought. Understandable, Daniel said, a knowing look in his eyes. You just went through something pretty heavy. It's okay to take a moment to process it. Michael nodded, grateful for Daniel's understanding. They walked together down the street, the sounds of the city humming around them. Cars passing, people chatting, life continuing on as if nothing had changed. But for Michael, everything had changed. "Can you believe it?" Daniel asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "You actually took her to court and won. That's not something many people would have the guts to do." "It wasn't easy," Michael admitted, a hint of vulnerability creeping into his voice. "There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if it was worth it. I mean, the way she twisted the narrative." Daniel cut him off. "You stood your ground, Mike. You didn't let her manipulate you or the situation. That takes strength." "Yeah, but it's exhausting," Michael said, shaking his head. "It feels like I'm constantly fighting battles, like I have to prove myself over and over again. Why can't people just see me for who I am?" Daniel's expression softened, his eyes reflecting understanding. "It shouldn't have to be this way, but unfortunately, that's the reality for many people. You did what needed to be done. You showed strength in a moment of weakness." As they strolled through the bustling streets, Michael began to reflect on the experiences that had shaped him. He thought about the countless times he had faced prejudice and judgment, moments when people had assumed the worst of him based on the color of his skin. He remembered the familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach whenever he entered unfamiliar spaces, the way he had learned to navigate the world with caution. But this time, it had been different. This time, he had fought back, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless against ignorance and hatred. The courtroom had become more than just a place of legal proceedings. It had transformed into a battleground for dignity, respect, and truth. As they reached a nearby park, Michael suggested they take a seat on a bench under the sprawling branches of an oak tree. They settled in, watching as families played nearby, children laughing and running in circles, oblivious to the complexities of the world around them. "It's funny," Michael mused, gazing out at the scene. "I spent so long trying to fit in, to prove I belonged. But the truth is, I'm tired of bending to meet others' expectations. I want to be authentic, to stand tall in who I am." Daniel nodded in agreement. "That's the spirit, man. Authenticity is powerful. You don't have to hide or change for anyone else." Michael sighed, a mix of relief and renewed determination swelling within him. "You're right. I've let fear dictate my actions for too long. It's time to embrace who I am and challenge the world to accept that." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts, the air filled with the sounds of laughter and play. The setting sun cast a warm glow, enveloping them in a sense of calm and clarity. "Have you thought about what's next?" Daniel asked, breaking the stillness. "Now that you've faced Karen and won, what do you want to do?" "I think I want to use this experience to help others," Michael replied, a spark igniting within him. "There are so many people out there who feel voiceless, who have experienced what I went through. I want to advocate for change, to be a voice for those who might not have one." "That sounds amazing," Daniel said, a smile breaking across his face. "You'd be great at that. You have a story to tell, and your journey could inspire so many people." As they continued to talk, ideas began to flow. Michael envisioned starting a community program aimed at raising awareness about racism, prejudice, and the importance of standing up against injustice. He imagined hosting workshops, speaking engagements, and open dialogues where people could share their experiences and learn from one another. "This is bigger than just you," Daniel said, nodding in encouragement. "You could make a real impact. Your story matters, and it deserves to be heard." Michael's heart swelled with gratitude for his friend's unwavering support. "Thanks, man. It's going to take work, but I'm ready for it. I want to turn this anger and frustration into something positive." As they wrapped up their conversation, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose settle within him. He had faced down a bully, taken a stand for himself, and emerged victorious. Now he was ready to channel that strength into something meaningful, to advocate for change and empower others. With the sun setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Michael stood up, feeling invigorated by the possibilities that lay ahead. "Let's go grab some food," he said, a smile breaking across his face. "I want to celebrate this win." As they walked away from the park, laughter echoed around them, a reminder that life continued to move forward. Michael felt a sense of belonging settle over him, the weight of the past lifting as he embraced the promise of the future. He had faced Karen and won, but more importantly, he had discovered his voice and the power of standing up for what was right. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth every step. And as he stepped into the world beyond the courthouse, he knew he was ready to fight not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt the sting of injustice. He would be a beacon of hope, a champion for change, and a reminder that together they could rise above the hate and build a better future.